The thunder of hoofbeats echoed across the barren landscape as Bethany Evans clutched her husband's death certificate, tears stinging her eyes. The date June 18, 1878, would forever be etched in her memory as the day she not only buried Richard Evans, but discovered his fortune had vanished like morning mist over the Kennewick Hills. "Madam, I'm afraid there's been some discrepancy with your husband's accounts," the banker had told her that morning, his eyes never quite meeting hers. "It appears he died without much to his name." Bethany knew better. Richard had struck gold in the mountains outside Kennewick, Washington Territory, a strike he'd kept quiet from most except her. They had planned to build a proper home, start the family they'd always dreamed of. Now she stood alone on the porch of their modest cabin, watching as the Prescott brothers James and William rode away from the bank, their saddlebags noticeably heavier than when they'd arrived. The brothers who had convinced Richard to invest with them. The brothers who had served as witnesses to his will. The brothers who now claimed Richard had gambled everything away in his final days. "Miss Evans." A deep voice startled her from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall stranger atop a magnificent chestnut horse. His face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, but she could make out piercing eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "I don't know you, sir," Bethany replied, quickly wiping away her tears. "The name's Tucker Calloway," he said, removing his hat to reveal sun-weathered features and dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "I was a friend of your husband's. I've come about the gold." The gold. The very mention of it sent a flutter of both hope and dread through Bethany's chest. "There's no gold anymore, Mr. Calloway. At least that's what the bank tells me." Tucker Calloway's expression hardened. "That's why I'm here, madam. Richard sent me a letter before he died. Said if anything happened to him, I was to make sure you got what was rightfully yours." He dismounted, boots hitting the dirt with practiced ease. "May I come in? We have much to discuss." Bethany hesitated. This stranger claimed to be her husband's friend, yet Richard had never mentioned him, but something in those steady eyes compelled her to believe him. With a slight nod, she opened the door wider. "I have nothing to offer you but coffee, Mr. Calloway." "Coffee's more than enough, Miss Evans." He followed her inside, hat in hand, his spurs jingling softly against the wooden floor. "And what I'm offering you is justice." The small cabin felt even smaller with Tucker's imposing presence. He stood a head taller than Richard had been, with shoulders broad enough to suggest he was accustomed to hard labor. Bethany busied herself with the coffee pot, aware of his eyes studying the modest interior of what should have been just a temporary home. "Richard wrote that he'd struck gold," Tucker said as she handed him a steaming cup. "Said it was enough to set you both up for life." Bethany's hands trembled slightly. "He did. We were keeping it quiet until all the arrangements were made. He only told the Prescott brothers because he needed investors for equipment." Tucker took a sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving her face. "How did he die, Miss Evans?" "Mining accident," she replied, her voice catching. "At least that's what they told me. A cave-in. They brought his body back wrapped in canvas." Tucker's jaw tightened. "Did you see him?" "No." The realization struck her suddenly. "They said it would be too distressing." A chill ran through her despite the June heat. "Mr. Calloway, are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything yet," he said, placing his cup down. "But I know Richard Evans wasn't a careless man, and I know the Prescott brothers have been expanding their operations mighty fast for men who claim the venture failed." Hope, dangerous and sharp, bloomed in Bethany's chest. "The bank manager, Mr. Mitchell, showed me papers. Said Richard signed everything over to them before he died. I'd bet my best horse those signatures aren't genuine." Tucker stood, his full height making the cabin ceiling seem lower. Miss Evans, I made your husband a promise. I intend to keep it. Why would you help me? You're a stranger to me." Tucker's expression softened slightly. "Your husband saved my life once. I owe him a debt I can never repay. But more than that, I can't abide thieves who prey on widows." Bethany studied him, this cowboy who'd appeared like an answer to prayers she hadn't even voiced. "What do you propose to do?" "First, I need to see those papers at the bank. Then I'll pay a visit to the mine where Richard died." He placed his hat back on his head. "And I'll need to know everything about the Prescott brothers, their habits, their weaknesses. They're careful men, Mr. Calloway. They've built their reputation in Kennewick over years. Every man has a weakness, Miss Evans." Tucker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "And every careful man makes mistakes eventually." As Tucker stepped back into the sunlight, Bethany followed him to the porch. "Mr. Calloway, I have nothing to offer you for your help." He mounted his horse with fluid grace, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You've already lost enough, Miss Evans. Consider this a debt being paid." As he rode away, Bethany felt something stir within her, something beyond the grief that had consumed her these past weeks. It felt dangerously like hope. The morning sun had barely begun to warm the streets of Kennewick when Tucker Calloway tied his horse outside the First National Bank. He'd spent the night at the town's only hotel, using the evening to observe the town and listen to its gossip. The Prescott brothers owned not only the largest house in town, but also the saloon where most of the miners spent their earnings. Their influence stretched through Kennewick like roots of a poisonous weed. Tucker adjusted his gun belt and straightened his jacket before entering the bank. Inside, the cool air carried the scent of polished wood and ink. A young clerk looked up, his expression neutral but curious. "Good morning," Tucker said, approaching with the confident stride of a man with legitimate business. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Mitchell, please." The clerk hesitated. "Do you have an appointment, sir?" "No, but I'm sure he'll want to see me. Tell him it's regarding the Evans estate." The mention of Evans caused a flicker of unease across the clerk's face before he disappeared into the back office. Moments later, a portly man with thinning hair and spectacles emerged, his smile as practiced as a gambler's poker face. "I'm Harold Mitchell. How may I help you, Mr. Calloway? Tucker Calloway." Tucker removed his hat, holding it respectfully. "I'm here about Richard Evans and his mining claim." Mitchell's smile faltered slightly. "I'm afraid that matter is settled, Mr. Calloway. Mrs. Evans has been informed of her husband's financial situation." "That's precisely what I'd like to discuss." Tucker's voice remained pleasant, but his eyes hardened. "I'd like to see the documents transferring ownership of the claim to the Prescott brothers. I'm afraid that's confidential banking information." Tucker leaned in slightly. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm acting as Mrs. Evans' representative in this matter. She's entitled to see those documents, and by extension, so am I." Mitchell straightened his vest, clearly uncomfortable. "Does Mrs. Evans have documentation appointing you as her representative?" "Not yet." "But I can return with her if that would make you more comfortable." Tucker smiled thinly. "Or we could save everyone the trouble. I'm sure you wouldn't want Mrs. Evans distraught in your bank, questioning the legitimacy of her husband's signatures in front of your other customers." The threat hung in the air between them. Mitchell glanced toward the front of the bank where several townspeople were conducting their morning business. "Very well," he finally said. "Wait here." While Mitchell disappeared into his office, Tucker observed the bank's layout. 2 tellers, the young clerk and presumably Mitchell were the only employees present. The safe would be in the back. Standard protocol for a bank this size. Mitchell returned with a folder, which he placed on the counter with obvious reluctance. "These are copies of the original documents," he explained. "As you can see, everything is in order. Mr. Evans signed over his claim to the Prescott brothers 3 days before his unfortunate accident. Tucker examined the papers carefully. The handwriting was consistent with the signature, suggesting the same person had filled out the form and signed it, or that someone had taken great care to forge both. Either way, something wasn't right. "Mr. Mitchell, did you witness these signatures?" Mitchell cleared his throat. "No, the Prescott brothers brought the documents in already signed." "I see. And you didn't find it unusual that a man would sign away a valuable gold claim days before his death? Mining is a risky business, Mr. Calloway." "I understood Mr. Evans had incurred significant debts purchasing equipment." Tucker folded the papers and tucked them inside his jacket. "I'll be keeping these copies for now." "Now see here," Mitchell began to protest. "Mrs. Evans is entitled to copies of all documents pertaining to her husband's estate," Tucker interrupted smoothly. "I'm sure you're aware of that, Mr. Mitchell." The banker's face flushed red. "The Prescott brothers won't take kindly to your interference, Mr. Calloway." Tucker placed his hat back on his head. "Then I look forward to discussing the matter with them directly." He tipped his hat slightly. "Good day, Mr. Mitchell." Outside the bank, Tucker mounted his horse and headed toward the Evans claim, located in the foothills north of town. The documents inside his jacket were the first piece of evidence, but he needed more. He needed to see where Richard supposedly died, and more importantly, he needed to find out if the gold was still there. The mining camp was a collection of rough cabins and tents surrounding a more substantial structure that served as the operations headquarters. Men moved about with purpose, carrying tools and ore samples. Tucker approached casually, as if he belonged there. A burly foreman intercepted him before he could get too close to the mine entrance. "Help you, mister?" "Looking for work," Tucker replied easily. "Heard the Prescott brothers were hiring experienced miners." The foreman looked him over skeptically. "You don't look like a miner." "Done a bit of everything. Started in the California gold fields, worked my way up through Colorado." The lies came easily. "Heard there was good pay here." "Might be," the foreman conceded. "But we need men who know what they're doing." "Any references?" "Worked the Blue Sky mine in Colorado." "Ask for Patrick Donovan if you're checking." Tucker knew Patrick would vouch for him if anyone bothered to send a telegraph. They'd ridden together years ago before Patrick settled into mining. "We'll see," the foreman said. "Pays $4 a day, sunrise to sunset. Bunkhouse is over there." "Jobs aren't guaranteed until you prove yourself." "Fair enough," Tucker agreed. "When do I start?" "Tomorrow morning. Get yourself settled." The foreman turned to leave, then paused. "What you say your name was?" Tucker Reed." The false surname rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. As the foreman walked away, Tucker made his way to the bunkhouse, taking careful note of the mine's layout. The main shaft was heavily guarded compared to most operations unusual, unless they were pulling out exceptional ore. Near the entrance, Tucker spotted a familiar face, James Prescott, the younger of the two brothers, giving instructions to a group of miners. James was a slim man with calculating eyes and a meticulously groomed mustache. Unlike his brother William, who preferred the comforts of town, James handled the day-to-day operations of their various businesses. Tucker kept his head down and continued to the bunkhouse, where he claimed an empty bunk and struck up conversations with the other miners. By nightfall, he'd learned that the main shaft had been temporarily closed following a cave-in that had killed a man, Richard Evans, but had reopened just days later, yielding impressively rich ore. "Never seen anything like it," an older miner named Crawford told him over a tin cup of coffee. "They hit a vein that's paying out better than anything in the territory. Prescotts are keeping it quiet, though. Don't want to rush." "Smart," Tucker agreed. "Where'd the cave-in happen?" Crawford pointed toward the main shaft. About 50 yards in, there's a side tunnel. That's where Evans was working alone. Shame about him. Seemed like a decent fellow. You knew him. Not well. Kept to himself mostly. Had big plans, though, always talking about the house he was going to build his wife once they struck it rich. Crawford shook his head. Mining's a cruel business. One day you're planning your fortune. Next day you're buried under a ton of rock. Tucker sipped his coffee, his mind working quickly. The Prescotts seem to have done well for themselves. That they have. William's building the biggest house Kennewick's ever seen. Some say it's built on blood money, but no one says it to his face. Crawford lowered his voice. Between you and me, there's something not right about how quickly they closed off Evans' tunnel after recovering his body. Didn't even let his widow see him, said he was too mangled. Tucker's grip tightened on his cup. That's so. Happened quick, too. One day Evans is excitedly showing ore samples, the next he's dead, and the Prescotts are claiming the whole operation as theirs. Crawford shrugged. Not my business, though. I just swing a pickaxe where they tell me. That night, when the camp had settled into sleep, Tucker slipped out of the bunkhouse. The main shaft was guarded by a single drowsy man who was easily avoided. Using a small lantern, Tucker made his way into the mine, counting his steps until he reached the side tunnel Crawford had mentioned. It was blocked off with fresh timber and warning signs, but Tucker could see it had been deliberately sealed, not collapsed. With careful movements, he removed enough of the barricade to slip through, replacing it behind him. The tunnel beyond showed no signs of a cave-in. Instead, it opened into a small chamber where the gleam of gold-flecked quartz was unmistakable in the lantern light. Tucker extracted a sample and examined it closely. This was no ordinary strike. This was exactly what Richard had described in his letter. A vein rich enough to make a man wealthy for life. Tucker continued exploring until he found what he was looking for: evidence of blasting that had been done after the supposed cave-in. The Prescotts hadn't just stolen Richard's claim. They'd continued mining his gold. As Tucker turned to leave, his lantern illuminated something half buried in the dirt floor: a pocket watch. He knelt to retrieve it, wiping away the dust to reveal the initials RE engraved on its surface. Richard Evans' watch, left behind in a tunnel where he supposedly died. Tucker pocketed the watch and made his way back through the mine, his suspicions now hardened into certainty. Richard Evans hadn't died in a cave-in. Something far more sinister had happened, and the Prescott brothers were responsible. Dawn was breaking as Tucker slipped back into the bunkhouse, his mind racing with plans. He needed to get word to Bethany, but he also needed more evidence before confronting the Prescotts directly. For now, he would play the role of eager miner, watching and waiting for his opportunity. Bethany Evans spent her morning, as she had every day since Richard's death, trying to maintain the life they'd built together, despite the crushing financial reality she now faced. Without Richard's promised fortune, the cabin and small plot of land would soon be all she had left, and even those might be at risk if she couldn't make the tax payments. She was hanging laundry when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made her turn. Her heart leaped at the sight of Tucker Calloway, though she quickly chided herself for such a reaction. He was here because of a debt to Richard, nothing more. "Mr. Calloway," she greeted him, wiping her hands on her apron. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Tucker dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. "I've been at the Prescott mine since yesterday," he explained. "Found some things you should know about." Inside the cabin, Tucker placed Richard's pocket watch on the table. Bethany's hand flew to her mouth as she recognized it instantly. "Where did you find this?" Her voice trembled as she picked it up, running her thumb over the familiar engraving. "In the tunnel where Richard supposedly died." Tucker's voice was gentle but firm. There was no cave-in, Bethany. That tunnel is intact and rich with gold the Prescotts are mining right now. Bethany sank into a chair, the watch clutched tightly in her hand. Then how did he die? Why would they lie? Tucker pulled out the papers he'd taken from the bank. These transfers are forgeries. Look at the signature, it's too perfect, too deliberate. Richard's real signature had a distinctive flair to the E that's missing here. Bethany examined the papers, anger replacing shock. They killed him for his gold. I believe so. Tucker sat across from her, but proving it won't be easy. The Prescotts have influence in this town. The sheriff, the bank, they're all connected. What do we do? Bethany looked up at him, her blue eyes fierce despite the tears threatening to spill. I won't let them get away with this. Tucker was struck by her strength. Where many widows might collapse under such revelations, Bethany Evans showed the steel beneath her grief. First, we need more evidence, he said. I'm working at the mine under a false name. The men talk, especially after a few drinks. Someone must know something about what really happened to Richard. And if we get the evidence, then we take it to the territorial marshal in Walla Walla. He's outside the Prescott's sphere of influence. Bethany's fingers traced the initials on the watch. How long will this take? I have perhaps 2 months before I'll need to sell this land to survive. Tucker considered this. We need to move quickly but carefully. The Prescotts are dangerous men. I'm not afraid, Bethany said firmly. You should be, Tucker replied, his eyes serious. But we'll use that to our advantage. You should continue as you have been a grieving widow struggling to carry on. Meanwhile, I'll get closer to the Prescotts and their operation. And what if they discover who you really are? Tucker's hand instinctively moved to his gun. I can take care of myself. It's you I'm worried about. I'll be fine. No one suspects I know anything. Bethany stood, a new determination in her bearing. Richard's friend, Mrs. Patterson, has invited me to help with her seamstress work. I'll take the position. It will give me an income and access to town gossip. Tucker nodded approvingly. Good thinking. The wives and daughters who come for fittings often know more about their husbands' and fathers' business than the men realize. As Tucker prepared to leave, Bethany stopped him with a gentle touch on his arm. Mr. Calloway, Tucker, thank you. Not many men would risk themselves for a stranger's widow. Tucker looked down at her hand on his arm, then at her face, really looked at her for perhaps the first time. Grief had hollowed her cheeks somewhat, but couldn't diminish her natural beauty. Her chestnut hair was pulled back in a simple knot, revealing delicate features and eyes that seemed to shift between blue and gray depending on the light. Like I said, I owed Richard, he replied, his voice rougher than he intended. But even if I didn't, this kind of injustice isn't something I could ride away from. Their eyes held for a moment longer than necessary before Tucker broke the connection, settling his hat on his head. I'll get word to you when I can. Be careful who you trust, Bethany. As he rode back toward the mine, Tucker found himself thinking of the strength in Bethany's eyes, the determination in her voice. Richard Evans had been a fortunate man, and the Prescott brothers had taken more from her than just gold. They had stolen her future, her security, her happiness. Tucker's resolve hardened. He would recover every dollar of Richard's fortune for his widow. And he would make sure the Prescott brothers paid for their crimes. The next 2 weeks passed in a careful dance of deception. Tucker established himself as a hard-working miner, gaining the foreman's trust and gradually being assigned to more sensitive areas of the operation. Bethany, meanwhile, settled into her role at Mrs. Patterson's shop, her nimble fingers and eye for detail making her an asset to the busy seamstress. Through whispered conversations and careful observation, Tucker pieced together the events surrounding Richard's death. A young miner named Ellis new to the camp but loose-lipped after a few drinks, proved particularly informative. "I wasn't here when Evans died," Ellis confided one evening as they sat outside the bunkhouse, "but my cousin was. Said the whole thing stunk worse than week-old fish." "How so?" Tucker asked casually, offering Ellis his tobacco pouch. Ellis rolled a cigarette with practiced fingers. Evans had been showing off ore samples, talking big about his strike. Next day, James Prescott and that foreman Harris took Evans into his tunnel for an inspection. Only 2 came back out claiming there'd been a collapse. Nobody questioned it. Harris threatened to fire anyone who went near that tunnel. By nightfall, they'd brought out a body wrapped up tight. Nobody saw the face. Ellis leaned closer. "My cousin said he heard a gunshot, not a cave-in. But he values his life too much to say it aloud." Tucker absorbed this information, fitting it with what he already knew. "Where's your cousin now?" Moved on to Idaho after that. Said the place gave him nightmares. The next day, Tucker volunteered to help transport a shipment of ore to the assay office in Walla Walla. James Prescott himself would be accompanying the shipment, providing Tucker the perfect opportunity to observe him more closely. The journey gave Tucker insights into James' character, his meticulous attention to detail, his quiet authority, and most tellingly, his complete lack of remorse when discussing the unfortunate accident that had claimed Richard Evans' life. "Mining's a dangerous profession," James remarked as they made camp on the first night. "Evans knew the risks." "Must have been hard losing a man," Tucker prompted. James shrugged, poking at the campfire. "Business carries risks. Evans was careless with his blasting, cost him his life." "And his claim?" Tucker kept his tone neutral, curious. "Fortunately, he'd already sold it to us. Smart move on his part, ensured his widow wouldn't be left with nothing." James smiled thinly. "Though from what I hear, she's still struggling. Shame." Tucker fought to keep his expression neutral. "Perhaps someone should help her out. The bank might foreclose eventually. My brother has his eye on that parcel, completes our holdings in that area." James poured himself a cup of coffee. "Circle of life, Calloway. Some rise, some fall." It took every ounce of Tucker's self-control not to reach across the fire and throttle the man. Instead, he nodded thoughtfully and changed the subject, but his mind was racing. The Prescotts weren't just content with stealing Richard's gold, claimed they were systematically working to leave Bethany destitute and vulnerable, so they could acquire her land as well. When they reached Walla Walla, Tucker made an excuse to separate from James for a few hours. He headed straight for the territorial marshal's office, where he found Marshal Frank Dawson, a grizzled veteran of law enforcement with a reputation for incorruptibility. "I need to report a murder," Tucker announced without preamble once they were alone in Dawson's office. Dawson's bushy eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Calloway. Tucker Calloway." He leaned forward. "The Prescott brothers of Kennewick murdered Richard Evans for his gold claim and forged documents transferring ownership." Dawson's expression remained impassive as Tucker laid out the evidence he'd gathered so far: the intact tunnel, the forged signatures, Ellis's testimony about a gunshot, and James Prescott's own remarks about acquiring the widow's land. "This is all circumstantial," Dawson finally said. "Nothing a good lawyer couldn't dismiss." "I know," Tucker admitted. "That's why I need your help. The sheriff in Kennewick won't touch the Prescotts, but you have jurisdiction throughout the territory." Dawson stroked his graying beard. "The Prescotts have friends in the territorial government. I'd need solid evidence, a confession, an eyewitness, or physical proof of murder." "What about the forgeries?" "Banking fraud is easier to prove than murder. If you can get me the original documents with Evans' authentic signature for comparison, that might be enough to start an investigation." Tucker nodded. I'll find a way. Be careful, Calloway. Men who kill once rarely hesitate to do it again. Tucker returned to the assay office just as James was concluding his business. The ore samples had assayed at impressively high values, putting James in an expansive mood. He suggested they celebrate at one of Walla Walla's better establishments before heading back to Kennewick. Over expensive whiskey, Tucker worked to gain more of James' confidence, presenting himself as an ambitious man interested in opportunities beyond mere mining work. "A man of your capabilities could do well with us," James observed, slightly loosened by alcohol. "We're expanding operations, need trustworthy men." "I'm interested," Tucker replied. "Though I'm curious about your brother. Would he have a say in bringing me on?" "William handles the financial side," James explained. "I run the operations, but he trusts my judgment on personnel. You'll meet him when we return. He's hosting a gathering to announce our latest venture." "Sounds like quite an operation you're building." James smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "We've had some fortunate turns lately. The Evans claim proved more valuable than even we anticipated." "Lucky timing on the purchase," Tucker remarked innocently. Something flickered in James' eyes, caution, perhaps, or suspicion. "Indeed. Sometimes fate favors the bold, Calloway." The ride back to Kennewick was tense with unspoken truths. Tucker sensed that, despite his careful performance, James Prescott wasn't entirely convinced by his eager employee act. He would need to be even more cautious moving forward. Meanwhile, Bethany had been conducting her own investigation through the seamstress shop. Mrs. Patterson's clientele included the wives of Kennewick's most prominent citizens, including Sophia Prescott, William's wife. "The gown must be perfect for the announcement party," Sophia had insisted during her fitting. "William says it's the most important event we've hosted. Everyone who matters in the territory will be there." "It sounds wonderful, Mrs. Patterson had remarked while Bethany silently pinned the gown's hem. "Your husband's mining ventures must be prospering." "Beyond all expectations," Sophia boasted. "William says the new claim is producing more gold than anything they've seen before. We're building a new wing on the house, and he's ordered furniture all the way from San Francisco." Later, as they worked alone in the shop, Mrs. Patterson had shaken her head sadly. "All built on poor Richard Evans' discovery, no doubt." Sophia might not know it, but everyone else in town can do the arithmetic. "You knew Richard?" Bethany asked carefully. Everyone knew Richard. Honest as the day is long. When he started showing those ore samples around town, we all knew he'd finally struck it rich, Mrs. Patterson lowered her voice. "Then suddenly he's dead, and the Prescotts are claiming they bought his claim days earlier. Convenient, that." No one questioned it. "The sheriff is William Prescott's brother-in-law," Mrs. Patterson said significantly. "And they own half the businesses in town. People value their livelihoods too much to ask uncomfortable questions." This conversation gave Bethany an idea. That evening, she wrote a careful note to Tucker and arranged for it to be delivered to him at the mining camp through Mrs. Patterson's nephew, who worked in the camp kitchen. The note was simple. "The Prescotts are hosting a gathering to announce their new venture. Mrs. P. says important papers kept in William's home office. Invitation delivered today." Tucker received the message with mixed emotions: alarm at Bethany's boldness, admiration for her quick thinking, and concern for her safety. The Prescott gathering could indeed provide an opportunity to access the original documents they needed, but it also carried tremendous risk. When he finally managed to slip away from the camp to visit her, they argued in hushed tones in her cabin. "It's too dangerous," Tucker insisted. "If they catch you searching William's office, they won't," Bethany countered. "I've been invited as Mrs. Patterson's assistant." The house will be full of guests. No one will notice me slipping away briefly. And if they do, I'll say I was looking for the powder room." She met his gaze steadily. "Tucker, we need those original documents. Marshall Dawson said so himself." Tucker ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I don't like putting you in harm's way. This is my fight too," Bethany reminded him softly. "More than yours, in fact. Richard was my husband. They stole my future." Looking at her determined face, Tucker knew he couldn't dissuade her. "At least let me be there too. James mentioned I might be invited to the gathering. I'll find a way to watch over you." Bethany's expression softened. "Thank you for your concern, but I'm not some delicate flower that needs constant protection. I grew up on a farm in Oregon. I can handle myself." Tucker couldn't help but smile at her spirit. "I don't doubt it, but humor me anyway." Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection that went beyond their shared mission. For a brief moment, Tucker allowed himself to acknowledge the growing admiration he felt for this remarkable woman. Then, remembering she was still grieving her husband, his friend, he quickly looked away. "We should go over exactly what documents to look for," he said, his voice deliberately businesslike. Bethany nodded, though a faint color had risen to her cheeks. "Of course." The next few days were consumed with preparations. As predicted, James Prescott extended an invitation to Tucker for the gathering, presenting it as an opportunity to meet influential people who might advance your career. Tucker accepted with appropriate gratitude while secretly coordinating signals with Bethany for the event. The night of the gathering arrived with the Prescott mansion blazing with lights. The newly constructed home stood as a monument to the brothers' wealth and influence, its grand facade impressive even by territorial standards. Carriages lined the circular drive as Kennewick's elite arrived in their finest attire. Tucker arrived alone, dressed in the best clothes he could procure on short notice, a dark suit that fit well enough to suggest he wasn't entirely unfamiliar with such finery. He spotted Bethany almost immediately, moving efficiently among the guests with a tray of champagne glasses, nearly unrecognizable in her formal black dress, and with her hair arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and she gave an almost imperceptible nod before continuing her duties. Tucker circulated among the guests, listening more than talking, gauging the room's dynamics and identifying potential allies or threats. William Prescott proved to be everything his brother wasn't: outgoing, boisterous, and overtly charming. Where James was calculating and reserved, William was effusive and gregarious, commanding attention whenever he spoke. Yet Tucker detected the same coldness behind his smile, the same ruthless ambition that had likely led to Richard's murder. As the evening progressed, William called for attention, raising his glass in a toast. "Friends and associates, my brother and I thank you for joining our celebration tonight. Many of you have supported our ventures over the years, and tonight we're pleased to announce our most ambitious project yet." The crowd murmured appreciatively as William continued. "The Prescott Mining Company is expanding operations into the Blue Mountain region, having secured exclusive rights to what our assayers confirm is the richest gold deposit in the Washington Territory." Applause rippled through the gathering. Tucker watched as James surveyed the crowd with quiet satisfaction, his eyes occasionally drifting to the staircase leading to the upper floors where, presumably, William's office was located. "Tonight," William concluded grandly, "marks the beginning of a new era for Kennewick. Our success will be this town's success, and we invite you all to share in the prosperity to come." More applause followed. As glasses were raised and conversation resumed, Tucker noticed Bethany slipping away from the serving staff and toward a side hallway. He casually repositioned himself to keep both her path and the Prescott brothers in his line of sight. William was surrounded by well-wishers, but James stood slightly apart, his attention seemingly caught by Bethany's movement. Tucker tensed, prepared to create a distraction if necessary, but at that moment, Sophia Prescott appeared at James' side, engaging him in conversation. Tucker exhaled slowly, watching as Bethany disappeared down the hallway. Now came the waiting, perhaps the hardest part of any operation. He engaged a local businessman in mundane conversation while keeping track of the time. Bethany had estimated she would need 10 minutes at most to locate and examine the documents they sought. 8 minutes passed with excruciating slowness. Then 9. At the 10-minute mark, Tucker began to move casually toward the hallway Bethany had taken, only to freeze when he saw James Prescott disengage from his conversation and head in the same direction. Tucker changed course immediately, intercepting James with a glass of champagne and a question about mining techniques that he hoped would appeal to the man's expertise. James paused, clearly impatient but too polite to dismiss a potential business associate outright. "Fascinating presentation," Tucker said, gesturing toward the gathering. "I'm particularly interested in how you manage security for your ore shipments." James accepted the champagne but didn't drink. "Standard procedures, Calloway. Armed guards, varied schedules." "Of course," Tucker nodded. "I only ask because in Colorado, we had some trouble with—" He was interrupted by a commotion from the hallway, a woman's startled cry followed by William Prescott's angry voice. Tucker's blood ran cold as he turned to see William emerging from the hallway, his hand gripping Bethany's arm tightly. "What is the meaning of this?" William demanded loudly, causing conversations to halt and heads to turn. "This woman was in my private office going through my papers." Bethany's face was pale but composed. "I got lost looking for the powder room, sir. I meant no harm." "Lost?" "With my desk drawers open." William's face was flushed with anger. "Search her pockets." James moved swiftly toward them, his expression hardening as he recognized Bethany. "Isn't that the Evans widow?" Tucker fought to keep his expression neutral while his mind raced through options. Direct intervention would expose his connection to Bethany and potentially endanger them both. But he couldn't stand by while she was manhandled and accused. Before he could decide, Sophia Prescott stepped forward, her social instincts taking precedence over her husband's anger. "William, please. Not in front of our guests." She turned to the watching crowd with a forced smile. "A simple misunderstanding, I'm sure. Please, everyone, enjoy the music. I believe our musicians are ready for dancing." As if on cue, the small orchestra began to play, creating a soundtrack for the tense tableau. William released Bethany's arm but glared at her with undisguised suspicion. "Mrs. Patterson will hear about this," he said coldly, "and I suggest you leave my house immediately." "Of course, sir," Bethany replied, her dignity intact despite her obvious fear. "I apologize for any misunderstanding." As she moved toward the exit, Tucker caught her eye briefly. Her almost imperceptible nod told him she had found what they needed. Now he just had to ensure she got away safely. "Excuse me," Tucker said to James, who was watching Bethany's retreat with narrowed eyes. "Nature calls." "Too much champagne, I'm afraid." James barely acknowledged him, his attention fixed on Bethany. Tucker moved casually toward the entrance, timing his exit to coincide with Bethany's departure. Outside, he caught up with her as she hurried down the drive. "Did they hurt you?" he asked quietly, falling into step beside her. "No," she replied, her voice steady despite her ordeal. "But William nearly caught me with the documents in my hand. I only had time to memorize the most important details." "That's better than nothing. What did you find?" "The original transfer agreement." A smile ghosted across her lips despite the tension. "The signature doesn't match the copy from the bank, not even close, and there's more, a letter from Richard dated the day he died, declining their offer to buy his claim." Tucker's pulse quickened. "That proves the bank documents are forgeries." "Yes, but I couldn't take it. William returned unexpectedly." Her pace slowed as they reached the edge of the Prescott property. "Tucker, there was something else, a ledger showing payments to Sheriff Crawford. Large payments coinciding with Richard's death." Tucker absorbed this information grimly. "The sheriff's in their pocket, as we suspected, but this confirms it." He glanced back at the mansion. "We need to move quickly now. The Prescotts will realize you weren't just looking for a powder room." "What's our next move?" "We get you somewhere safe first. Then I'll send word to Marshal Dawson." Tucker helped her into the waiting hired carriage. "They'll be watching your cabin. You can't go back there tonight." "Where then?" Tucker considered their limited options. "There's a widow named Mrs. Wilkins who runs a boarding house on the edge of town. She keeps to herself and doesn't ask questions. You'll be safe there while I arrange things." As the carriage pulled away from the Prescott mansion, neither of them noticed the figure on horseback that detached from the shadows to follow at a discreet distance. Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house was a modest two-story structure on the outskirts of Kennewick. The elderly widow accepted Bethany with minimal questions, seeming to understand the need for discretion. Tucker paid for a week in advance and promised to return the following day. "Lock your door," he instructed Bethany as they stood in the small second-floor room. "Don't open it for anyone but me." Bethany nodded, the events of the evening finally catching up with her as exhaustion crept into her features. "Tucker, if something happens to you, nothing's going to happen," he assured her, though they both knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "Just stay safe. That's all that matters right now." Their eyes held for a long moment. Then, in a movement that surprised them both, Bethany reached up and placed her hand against his cheek. "Be careful," she whispered. "I couldn't bear to lose you too." Tucker covered her hand with his own, his heart racing at the unexpected contact. "I'll be back by noon tomorrow," he promised, his voice rougher than usual. He forced himself to step away, to remember why he was here, to honor a debt to Richard, not to develop feelings for his widow. Yet as he descended the boarding house stairs, Tucker couldn't deny that his motivation had evolved. This was no longer just about a promise to a dead friend. It was about Bethany herself, her courage, her determination, and the future that had been stolen from her. Outside, Tucker mounted his horse and headed not toward the mining camp but toward the telegraph office. He needed to send an urgent message to Marshal Dawson, explaining the new evidence and the increasing danger. The streets of Kennewick were quiet in the late hour, most businesses closed except for the saloons. Tucker was so focused on formulating his message to Dawson that he almost missed the sound of hoofbeats behind him. Almost. Years of frontier living had honed his instincts. Tucker turned casually, as if checking his saddle, and caught a glimpse of a rider some distance back, moving at the same pace as himself. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with warning. Rather than heading directly to the telegraph office, Tucker made a detour down a side street, then another, confirming his suspicion when the rider followed. He considered his options quickly. Confrontation in town risked innocent bystanders. Leading his pursuer away from Bethany's location seemed the wiser choice. Tucker nudged his horse into a canter, heading out of town toward the open country. Behind him, his shadow abandoned any pretense of stealth and spurred his mount to follow. Once clear of the town's outskirts, Tucker guided his horse off the main road onto a trail that led toward a wooded area. The sound of pursuit grew closer. His follower was gaining ground. Tucker reached for his revolver, checking that it was loaded and ready. As the trees thickened around him, Tucker abruptly reined in his horse and dismounted, leading the animal off the trail into the cover of the pines. He didn't have to wait long. The pursuing rider slowed, clearly searching for signs of Tucker's passage in the darkness. Tucker recognized him as one of the guards from the Prescott mine, a hard-faced man named Hollister, known for his quick temper and quicker gun. "I know you're out there, Calloway," Hollister called into the darkness. "Just want to talk." Tucker remained silent, moving stealthily through the trees until he was positioned behind the searcher. "James Prescott sends his regards," Hollister continued, his hand hovering near his holster as he scanned the shadows. "Says you're not who you claim to be." In one smooth motion, Tucker pressed his revolver against the back of Hollister's neck. "Dismount, slowly." Hollister froze, then complied, raising his hand slightly. "You're making a mistake, Calloway." "The only mistake was thinking I wouldn't notice being followed," Tucker replied, relieving Hollister of his weapon. "Now, what does James Prescott know?" Hollister's laugh held no humor. "Everything. The Evans widow gave you away tonight sneaking around like that." James remembered Evans mentioning a friend named Calloway once. Didn't take much to put it together. Tucker's mind raced. If James had connected him to Richard, the charade was over. "What were your orders?" "Follow you. Find out where you took the widow. Report back." Hollister's shoulders tensed slightly, a tell Tucker recognized from experienced gunmen preparing to make a move. "Don't," Tucker warned, pressing the gun harder against Hollister's neck. "I've got questions that need answers first." "Like what?" "Like how Richard Evans really died." Hollister's hesitation was brief but telling. "Mining accident. Everyone knows that." "Try again," Tucker suggested. "The truth this time." Hollister remained stubbornly silent. Tucker changed tactics, stepping back slightly while keeping his gun trained on the man. "The territorial marshal is already investigating. Cooperate now, and maybe you won't hang alongside the Prescotts." Fear flickered across Hollister's face. "I didn't have anything to do with Evans' death. That was James and Harris. They took him into that tunnel to inspect the new strike, and only they know what happened after that. But there was no cave-in." "No," Hollister admitted reluctantly. "They shot him, made it look like an accident afterward. William forged the papers claiming they'd bought the claim days earlier. And you helped cover it up." Hollister's expression hardened. "I follow orders and get paid, same as anyone." Tucker considered his options. Hollister was too dangerous to release, but killing an unarmed man, even one complicit in murder, wasn't something Tucker was willing to do. "You're going to ride with me to Walla Walla," he decided. "Tell your story to Marshal Dawson." "The Prescotts will kill me," Hollister protested. "Only if they find you first." Tucker gestured with his gun. "Mount up. We're leaving now." As Hollister reluctantly climbed back into his saddle, Tucker kept his distance, knowing the man was still dangerous despite being disarmed. "Any tricks and I shoot, clear." Hollister nodded grimly, and they set off toward Walla Walla, Tucker maintaining a careful position behind and to the side of his prisoner. The journey would take most of the night, but reaching Marshal Dawson had become even more urgent now that the Prescotts had identified him. His promise to return to Bethany by noon would have to be broken. Tucker could only hope she would remain safely hidden at the boarding house until he could return with the marshal's protection. What Tucker couldn't know was that back in Kennewick, the Prescott brothers were already closing in on Bethany's location. A stable boy had recognized her entering Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house, and seeking reward money, had brought this information to William Prescott himself. As dawn broke over the eastern hills, Bethany awoke to urgent knocking at her door. Remembering Tucker's warning, she remained silent, hoping the visitor would assume the room was empty and leave. "Mrs. Evans." Mrs. Wilkins' tremulous voice came through the door. "There are men here from the sheriff's office. They say they need to speak with you immediately." Bethany's heart raced. "What do they want?" "Something about stolen documents from the Prescott home," Mrs. Wilkins replied, her voice betraying her anxiety. "They have a warrant, Mrs. Evans." Trapped and with no sign of Tucker, Bethany made a quick decision. She opened her window, relieved to find a sloping roof below that could provide an escape route. As the knocking at her door grew more insistent, she climbed out onto the roof, closing the window behind her. The morning air was cool against her skin as she carefully navigated the slippery shingles toward a nearby oak tree whose branches extended close to the house. Behind her, she heard the door to her room being forced open, followed by angry shouts. Bethany reached the tree just as a face appeared at the window she'd exited. With no time for caution, she leaped for the nearest branch, catching it with desperate hands and swinging her body toward the trunk. The rough bark scraped her palms as she scrambled to find footing, her heart pounding with fear and exertion. Below, men burst from the boarding house pointing up at her. "Mrs. Evans, by order of Sheriff Crawford, you're to come with us for questioning." Bethany ignored them, continuing her descent until she reached the lowest branch, then dropping the final 6 feet to the ground. She landed awkwardly, pain shooting through her ankle, but adrenaline pushed her forward into a stumbling run. The men pursuing her were hampered by having to circle around the boarding house, giving Bethany precious seconds to disappear into the maze of backyard gardens and alleyways that made up this part of town. Her destination was clear in her mind: Mrs. Patterson's shop. If anyone would help her now, it would be the kind seamstress who had made no secret of her dislike for the Prescotts. By the time she reached the back door of the shop, breathless and disheveled, Bethany's ankle was throbbing painfully. She knocked urgently, nearly collapsing with relief when Mrs. Patterson opened the door, her eyes widening at Bethany's appearance. "Good heavens, child, what's happened?" "The sheriff's men," Bethany gasped, limping inside as Mrs. Patterson quickly closed and locked the door behind her. "They're searching for me." "The Prescotts, they know I found evidence of what they did to Richard." Mrs. Patterson's normally gentle face hardened with resolve. "Then we'll make sure they don't find you here. Come." She led Bethany to the shop's storage room, where bolts of fabric were stacked from floor to ceiling. Moving several rolls aside, Mrs. Patterson revealed a small hidden space barely larger than a closet but perfectly concealed. "My late husband built this during the border disputes," she explained. "For valuables," he said, "but I think he always feared trouble might come again." She helped Bethany inside. "You'll be safe here until your Mr. Calloway returns." "He's not my—" Bethany began to protest, but Mrs. Patterson silenced her with a knowing look. "I've seen how you look at each other, dear, and I've seen how he looks at you when you're not watching. Now rest that ankle while I tend to the shop. If anyone comes looking, you'll hear them through the wall." As Mrs. Patterson replaced the fabric bolts, concealing Bethany in the hidden compartment, Bethany found herself reflecting on the older woman's words. Had she been so transparent in her growing feelings for Tucker? And more surprisingly, did he truly feel something for her in return? The thought brought a complex mix of emotions: hope, confusion, and a stab of guilt. Richard had been gone less than 3 months. Was it disloyal to feel this connection to another man so soon? Yet in the darkness of her hiding place, Bethany couldn't deny the truth of her heart. Tucker Calloway had awakened something in her that she'd thought died with Richard: a sense of possibility, of future. Outside the hidden room, She heard the shop bell jingle as customers arrived. Mrs. Patterson's cheerful greeting gave no hint of the fugitive concealed among her fabrics. Bethany settled in to wait, praying that Tucker had evaded whatever trap the Prescotts had set for him. Tucker and his reluctant prisoner arrived in Walla Walla as morning light spread across the town. Marshal Dawson was surprised but pleased by the unexpected development. Hollister's testimony provided exactly the eyewitness account they needed to move against the Prescott brothers. "I'll swear out arrest warrants immediately," Dawson promised, securing Hollister in a cell where the Prescotts' influence couldn't reach him. "We'll ride for Kennewick as soon as I gather a few deputies." "There's no time," Tucker insisted. "Bethany, Mrs. Evans is in danger." "The Prescotts know we're onto them." Dawson frowned, considering the urgency against the need for proper procedure. "The warrants give us legal authority, Calloway. Without them, we're just men with guns." "Then let me take the first warrant back to Kennewick while you gather your deputies," Tucker suggested. "I need to make sure Mrs. Evans is safe." Dawson studied Tucker's face, seeming to recognize the deeper motivation behind his concern. "Very well," he agreed after a moment. "I'll write the warrants now. You take James Prescott's and ride ahead. We'll be no more than 2 hours behind you with warrants for William and Sheriff Crawford." Within the hour, Tucker was galloping back toward Kennewick, the arrest warrant secure in his pocket and determination driving him forward. The morning had advanced toward noon by the time he reached the outskirts of town, his horse lathered from the hard ride. His first stop was Mrs. Wilkins' boarding house, where he discovered signs of the earlier confrontation. Mrs. Wilkins herself was distressed but resolute. "They had a warrant, Mr. Calloway, but she got away before they could take her. Climbed right out the window, she did." Never would have thought such a genteel lady had it in her. Relief flooded through Tucker at the news that Bethany had evaded capture, quickly followed by concern about where she might have gone. "Did you see which way she headed? Toward town. That's all I know." Mrs. Wilkins wrung her hands anxiously. "The sheriff's men were mighty upset, said they'd find her, one way or another." Tucker thanked the woman and headed into town, careful to remain alert for any sign of the sheriff's men or the Prescott brothers. His instinct was to check with Mrs. Patterson, given Bethany's connection to the seamstress, but approaching the shop directly might draw unwanted attention. Instead, he took a circuitous route, leaving his horse at the livery stable and proceeding on foot through back alleys until he reached the rear of Mrs. Patterson's establishment. The back door was locked, but his soft knock was answered almost immediately by Mrs. Patterson herself, her expression changing from wariness to relief when she recognized him. "Thank heavens," she whispered, ushering him inside and quickly securing the door. "She said you'd come." "Bethany's here?" Tucker asked, his voice equally low. Mrs. Patterson nodded, leading him through the storage room to the hidden compartment. As she moved the fabric bolts aside, Tucker felt his heart constrict at the sight of Bethany curled in the small space, her face pale but determined. "Tucker," she breathed, reaching for him instinctively. "I was so worried." He helped her out, noting her wince as she put weight on her right ankle. "You're hurt." "It's nothing serious," she assured him. "Just twisted it during my escape." "What happened? Did you send word to the marshal?" "Better than that." Tucker patted his pocket where the warrant rested. "I've got an arrest warrant for James Prescott." "Marshal Dawson is on his way with deputies and warrants for William and Sheriff Crawford. Hollister, one of the Prescott's men, confessed to everything." Hope flared in Bethany's eyes. "Then it's nearly over." "Nearly," Tucker agreed. "But we still need to be careful. The sheriff's men are looking for you, and the Prescotts won't go quietly once they know we have warrants." Mrs. Patterson, who had been keeping watch near the front of the shop, hurried back to them. "Sheriff's men outside," she warned. Two of them, asking questions at the grocer's across the street. Tucker peered cautiously through the storage room's small window. Sure enough, two armed deputies were questioning the grocer, who appeared to be shaking his head in denial. "They're searching door to door," he observed grimly. "Won't be long before they reach here." "The hidden room again," Mrs. Patterson suggested. Tucker shook his head. "Too risky. If they're thorough in their search, they might find it." He turned to Bethany. "How's your ankle? Can you walk if we need to move quickly?" She tested it gingerly. "I can manage. Where would we go?" Tucker considered their limited options. The marshal and his deputies wouldn't arrive for at least another hour. Until then, they needed a secure location where the sheriff's men wouldn't think to look. "The church," Mrs. Patterson suggested suddenly. "Father Matthews has no love for the Prescotts after they forced him to sell church land for their railroad spur. He'd help you." The church stood at the far end of town, its tall steeple visible from almost anywhere in Kennewick. Reaching it without being seen would be challenging, but not impossible if they used the network of alleyways and service paths that ran behind the town's main buildings. "It's our best option," Tucker decided. "Mrs. Patterson, can you create a distraction? Something to draw those deputies away from this direction." The older woman smiled, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Leave that to me, Mr. Calloway. Give me 5 minutes, then take the back path through the milliner's yard." As Mrs. Patterson hurried to the front of her shop, Tucker turned to Bethany. "Stay close to me. If anything goes wrong, run for the church no matter what happens to me. Father Matthews will protect you until the marshal arrives." Bethany's hand found his, squeezing firmly. "We stay together," she said, her tone brooking no argument. "I'm not losing anyone else I care about." The simple declaration stirred something deep in Tucker's chest, but there was no time to examine the feeling. Outside, they heard Mrs. Patterson's voice raised in alarm, shouting about a fire at the livery stable. As hoped, the commotion drew the deputies away, giving Tucker and Bethany their chance. They slipped out the back door and into the alley, Tucker supporting Bethany as they moved as quickly as her injured ankle would allow. The town was alive with activity as people responded to Mrs. Patterson's false alarm, providing additional cover for their progress toward the church. They were halfway there when Tucker spotted James Prescott himself, mounted on his black stallion at the intersection ahead, scanning the crowd with narrow eyes. Tucker pulled Bethany into the shadow of a recessed doorway just as James looked in their direction. "He's searching for us," Tucker whispered, holding Bethany close against him in the limited space. Her warmth and the subtle scent of lavender momentarily distracted him from the danger. "We'll wait until he moves on." Bethany nodded, her face tilted up toward his, their bodies pressed together by necessity. Tucker was acutely aware of her quickened breath, the way her hand rested against his chest, the trust in her eyes as she looked to him for protection. For several heartbeats, the world beyond their hiding place seemed to fade away. Then the sound of hoofbeats signaled James moving on, breaking the spell that had momentarily enveloped them. "Let's go," Tucker said, his voice rougher than intended. "The path should be clear now." They continued their cautious journey, reaching the church without further incident. Father Matthews, a silver-haired man with kind eyes and a resolute bearing, admitted them through a side door after Tucker's hurried explanation. "Of course I'll help," the priest said, leading them to his private study at the back of the church. "The Prescotts have brought nothing but trouble to this town with their greed. It's about time someone stood against them." The study was a comfortable room lined with books, offering both sanctuary and a clear view of the street through its curtained window. Father Matthews left them with assurances he would keep watch and bring news of the marshal's arrival. Alone at last in relative safety, Tucker and Bethany allowed themselves a moment of relief. She sank gratefully into an armchair while he remained standing, his body still tense with alertness as he peered through the curtains at the town beyond. "You think Mrs. Patterson will be all right?" Bethany asked, concern etching her features. "She's a clever woman," Tucker reassured her. "She'll claim she heard the rumor from someone else. There's no reason for them to connect her to us." Bethany nodded, then winced as she shifted her injured ankle. Tucker knelt beside her chair to examine it, his touch gentle as he assessed the swelling. "It's not broken," he determined, "but it needs to be wrapped." "May I?" At her nod, he found a clean handkerchief and carefully bound her ankle, his calloused fingers working with surprising tenderness. The simple act of caring for her wound felt strangely intimate, a quiet moment amidst the chaos of their circumstances. "Thank you," Bethany said softly when he finished. "Not just for this, for everything. Most men wouldn't have risked so much for a stranger." Tucker remained kneeling beside her chair, his eyes meeting hers. "You're not a stranger to me anymore, Bethany." The simple statement carried weight beyond the words themselves. Bethany's hand moved to touch his face, a gesture similar to their parting at the boarding house but somehow more significant now. "When this is over," she began hesitantly, "what will you do?" It was a question Tucker hadn't allowed himself to consider fully. His life had been one of constant movement, taking jobs where he found them, never staying long in one place. The prospect of something different, something permanent, was both appealing and terrifying. "I haven't thought that far ahead," he admitted. "What about you? Will you stay in Kennewick?" Bethany considered this. "I don't know. There are memories here, good ones with Richard before everything happened, but also painful ones now." Her eyes held his steadily. "I think perhaps a fresh start might be best." The unspoken question hung between them: would that fresh start include him? Before Tucker could respond, the study door opened as Father Matthews returned, his expression urgent. "Marshal Dawson has arrived with his deputies," he reported. "But there's trouble at the Prescott office. James and William have barricaded themselves inside with armed men. The marshal is calling for their surrender." Tucker rose immediately. "I need to be there. The marshal might need my help." He turned to Bethany. "Stay here where it's safe." "Be careful," she urged, her eyes conveying everything words couldn't. Tucker nodded, then followed Father Matthews through the church and out to the street beyond, where the confrontation was already underway. Marshal Dawson and 4 deputies had taken positions around the Prescott Mining Company office, rifles trained on the building's windows. A small crowd of townspeople had gathered at a safe distance, watching the drama unfold with a mixture of fear and fascination. "Prescott," Dawson called out. "This is Marshal Frank Dawson of the Territorial Court. I have warrants for the arrest of James and William Prescott on charges of murder, fraud, and theft. Come out with your hands visible." The response was a gunshot from an upper window, the bullet splintering wood near where Dawson stood. The crowd scattered for cover as the marshal and his deputies took more protected positions. Tucker approached Dawson from behind, identifying himself before the lawman could react. "They're not going to surrender peacefully," he observed. Dawson nodded grimly. "So it seems." "Sheriff Crawford's nowhere to be found, probably fled when he heard we were coming. But the Prescotts are making their stand." "How many men with them?" "At least 4 that we've seen, maybe more inside." Dawson glanced at Tucker. "Mrs. Evans safe, for now, at the church with Father Matthews." Another shot rang out from the building, followed by William Prescott's voice. "We're not coming out, Marshal. This is Prescott territory, and your territorial court has no jurisdiction here." "That's not how the law works, Prescott," Dawson called back. "You're only making it worse for yourselves." The standoff continued for nearly an hour, with occasional exchanges of gunfire but no progress toward resolution. Tucker remained with the marshal, providing information about the building's layout from his visits there and suggesting possible approaches. As the afternoon wore on, Tucker noticed movement at the rear of the building, a figure slipping out a back window while the marshal's attention was focused on the front. Even at a distance, Tucker recognized James Prescott's distinctive silhouette. "Dawson," he said urgently, "James is escaping out the back. He's heading for the stables." "Go," the marshal ordered without hesitation. "I'll handle William and the others." Tucker didn't need to be told twice. He circled wide around the building, using the cover of adjacent structures to approach the rear without being seen from the windows. As he'd suspected, James was making for the stables, presumably planning to flee town while his brother and men created a diversion. Tucker cut through an alleyway, emerging onto the street just as James reached the stable entrance. "That's far enough, Prescott," James froze, then slowly turned to face Tucker, his expression a mix of hatred and resignation. "Calloway, I should have known." "It's over," Tucker said, his revolver leveled steadily at the man who had murdered his friend. "The marshal has your brother surrounded. Hollister's testified against you. We know everything." A bitter smile twisted James' features. Do you know Richard Evans begged for his life before I shot him? Do you know he offered to split the claim with us if we just let him live?" His hand moved subtly toward his coat. "Some friend you had." "Don't," Tucker warned, recognizing the movement for what it was. "There's been enough killing." James' smile widened fractionally. "Perhaps one more." His hand darted toward his hidden weapon, but Tucker was faster. His shot caught James in the shoulder, spinning him backward against the stable wall. The concealed derringer fell from James' hand, clattering harmlessly to the ground. Tucker approached cautiously, kicking the small gun away before checking James' wound. It was bloody but not immediately life-threatening enough to incapacitate him, without adding another death to the day's events. "You should have killed me," James gasped through clenched teeth as Tucker bound his wound with a bandana. "Because if I ever get the chance, you won't," Tucker interrupted, hauling James to his feet. "You'll hang for what you did to Richard Evans. The territory doesn't take kindly to murderers." By the time Tucker delivered James to Marshal Dawson, William and their men had surrendered, realizing the futility of their position once their ammunition began to run low. The Prescott brothers were secured in the town jail under the marshal's direct supervision, awaiting transfer to Walla Walla for trial. Word of the arrests spread quickly through Kennewick. As Tucker made his way back to the church to retrieve Bethany, townspeople stopped him with handshakes and words of appreciation. The Prescott's influence had been a heavy weight on the community, one many had resented but few had dared to challenge. Bethany was waiting anxiously with Father Matthews when Tucker arrived, her face lit with relief at the sight of him, uninjured and triumphant. "It's finished," he told her, taking her hands in his. "The Prescotts are in custody." Marshal Dawson's men found the original documents in William's office safe, including Richard's will naming you as his sole heir. "The gold claim is legally yours again." Tears filled Bethany's eyes, but she blinked them away, her expression one of resolution rather than grief. "Then Richard can rest in peace at last." Father Matthews discreetly excused himself, leaving them alone in the study once more. "What happens now?" Tucker asked, still holding her hands. Bethany looked up at him, her eyes clear and certain. "Now we rebuild. The mine will need proper management. I'll need someone I can trust to run it honestly, someone who understands mining and knows the value of hard work." Tucker caught the implication in her words, but hesitated. Bethany, I'm not sure I'm the right man for that. I've spent my life drifting, never staying in one place too long. Is that what you want to continue doing? She asked directly. Or might you consider putting down roots? Here, perhaps. The question forced Tucker to confront desires he'd long suppressed for home, for belonging, for connection. I've never had much reason to stay anywhere before, he admitted. But now, she prompted gently when he didn't continue. Tucker took a deep breath, finally allowing himself to acknowledge what had been growing between them since their first meeting. Now I find myself wanting things I never thought I would, a home, a purpose. His voice softened. Someone to share them with. Bethany's smile was radiant despite the tears that threatened again. I find myself wanting those same things, Tucker, and I can't imagine sharing them with anyone but you. Some might say it's too soon after Richard, he cautioned, though his heart raced at her words. Richard would want me to be happy, she replied with quiet certainty. And he would approve of you, the man who honored his friendship and brought justice for his death. Besides, she added with a hint of mischief, who better to help me recover every dollar of his fortune than the man who made it possible? Tucker laughed softly, feeling lighter than he had in years. When you put it that way, Miss Evans, how could I possibly refuse? His hands released hers only to frame her face gently, as he leaned down to kiss her, a tender, questioning kiss that quickly deepened when she responded with unexpected fervor. In that moment, the past with its pain and loss seemed to recede, making way for a future neither had dared to imagine. The afternoon sun streamed through the study window, bathing them in golden light as they finally parted, both slightly breathless. I think, Tucker said, smiling down at her, that Kennewick might just be where I belong after all. 6 months later, the Evans Mining Company was flourishing under Tucker's management. The rich gold vein Richard had discovered continued to produce impressive yields, employing dozens of local men at fair wages. Bethany, now widely respected in Kennewick for her resilience and business acumen, worked alongside Tucker, handling the company's accounts and correspondence. The Prescott brothers' trial had been swift and decisive. The evidence against them, combined with Hollister's testimony, left no room for doubt about their guilt. Both were sentenced to hang, though William's sentence was later commuted to life imprisonment due to evidence suggesting James had been the primary instigator of Richard's murder. On a crisp autumn afternoon, Bethany stood in the doorway of the newly completed house Richard had once dreamed of building for her. Tucker approached from the stables, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Thinking about him? Tucker asked gently as he reached her side. Bethany nodded, her expression peaceful rather than pained. Sometimes I wonder what he would think of all this, the house, the company, us. Tucker's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her against his side. I think he'd be proud of what you've accomplished and grateful that you're happy again. I am happy, she confirmed, turning in his embrace to face him. Happier than I ever thought possible after losing him. The gold band on her finger, placed there just 2 weeks earlier in a ceremony presided over by Father Matthews, caught the last rays of sunlight as she reached up to touch Tucker's face. Their marriage had raised a few eyebrows given the relatively short time since Richard's death, but those who knew them understood that their bond had been forged in extraordinary circumstances. Mrs. Calloway, Tucker said, still savoring the newness of her married name, I believe you promised to show me the new curtains Mrs. Patterson delivered today. Bethany laughed, the sound light and free. I did indeed, Mr. Calloway. Though I suspect your interest in household furnishings is somewhat limited. On the contrary, he murmured, bending to kiss her, I find myself extraordinarily interested in every aspect of our home, particularly the bedroom furnishings. Her blush and the sparkle in her eyes were all the response he needed as she took his hand and led him inside, closing the door on the gathering dusk. The house Richard had envisioned had become a reality, though not in the way he had planned. His gold had indeed provided for Bethany's future, secured by the cowboy who had recovered every stolen dollar, and in the process, found something far more valuable than gold: a love that had grown from shared purpose into deep and abiding partnership. As winter settled over Kennewick, the Evans Mining Company continued to prosper under the Calloway's joint management. Tucker's experience and Bethany's business sense proved a formidable combination, earning them the respect of the mining community and the gratitude of their employees. With the Prescott's influence removed, Kennewick itself underwent a transformation. New businesses opened, unconstrained by the brothers' monopolistic practices. The town council, once firmly under William Prescott's thumb, now operated with transparency and genuine concern for community welfare. Tucker declined several invitations to join the council, preferring to focus on the mining operation and his new family. Their first child, a son they named Richard Tucker Calloway, arrived the following spring, bringing new joy to their household. Bethany proved as natural a mother as she had a businesswoman, balancing her duties at the mine office with caring for their infant son. On the child's first birthday, they held a celebration at their home, inviting friends and employees to share in their happiness. Mrs. Patterson, now a dear friend and frequent visitor, bounced young Richard on her knee while regaling guests with the story of Bethany's daring escape from her boarding house. "Never seen a lady scale down a tree in a dress before," she declared to appreciative laughter. Knew right then she was a special one. Tucker, watching his wife move among their guests with easy grace, felt a contentment he'd never imagined possible in his previously nomadic existence. The restlessness that had driven him for so many years had been replaced by purpose and belonging. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and their son slept peacefully in his nursery, Tucker found Bethany on the porch, gazing at the stars that blanketed the clear night sky. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the night chill. She leaned back against him, her head resting comfortably on his chest. "I was thinking about journeys," she replied. "How the most difficult paths sometimes lead to the most unexpected destinations." Tucker's arms tightened around her. "Philosophical tonight, aren't we?" "It's been exactly 2 years since Richard died," she reminded him softly. 2 years that have brought more changes than I ever could have imagined." Tucker was silent for a moment, respecting her need to acknowledge the anniversary. "Do you regret any of it?" he finally asked. Bethany turned in his arms to face him, her expression serious in the moonlight. "I regret that Richard died so violently that his dreams for us were cut short, but I could never regret the path that led me to you, Tucker, or to our son." He kissed her then, a gentle affirmation of the bond they shared. "I thank God every day that I received Richard's letter," he murmured against her lips. "Not just because it allowed me to help you, but because it brought me home when I didn't even know I was looking for one." Bethany's smile held all the warmth of their shared life as she took his hand and led him inside to the home. They had built together, a home founded on recovered fortune, but sustained by something far more precious: love born from adversity and strengthened through shared purpose. In the years that followed, the Evans Mining Company expanded its operations throughout the Washington Territory, becoming one of the region's most successful and respected enterprises. Tucker and Bethany welcomed 2 more children, a daughter named Elizabeth and another son they called James, honoring Tucker's father. Richard's gold claim, once the source of such tragedy, became instead the foundation of a legacy of honest industry and community investment. The Calloways established a fund for minors, widows, and orphans, ensuring that no family would face the destitution that had threatened Bethany after Richard's death. And in a small corner of the Kennewick Cemetery, a handsome headstone marked Richard Evans' final resting place, tended regularly by the woman who had loved him first and the man who had honored his memory by bringing his killers to justice and loving his widow with steadfast devotion. Justice had been served, a fortune recovered, and from the ashes of betrayal, a new love had bloomed as enduring as the gold that had sparked their journey and as precious as the life they had built together in the wild frontier of the American West.